This chapter will begin with a little bit of an introduction where we'll talk about elements and compounds. So, first of all, let's define these terms and think about some examples. An element is defined as a substance that consists of just one type of atom. And so you can think about some examples of elements. Think about substances that contain just one type of atom. Maybe some examples might be things like carbon, right? Carbon is composed of single carbon atoms, and that's the only type of atom that you have. Oxygen, right? That's an element that only contains oxygen atoms, or sodium is also an example of an element. And there are a lot of other examples, that's just a few of them there. We contrast that with what are called compounds. Now, these are substances that consist of two or more types of atoms that are combined together and bound together to form a compound. We can think about some examples of compounds. Perhaps the most well-known example of a compound might be water, that is H2O, right? This is a compound because it's a substance that is composed of hydrogen and oxygen atoms that are bound together. Other examples of compounds might be things like carbon dioxide, CO2, contains carbon and oxygen atoms, or maybe like glucose, C6H12O6. There you have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen all bound together. Now, let's talk a little bit more about elements. So most of the elements that we deal with on planet Earth are monatomic in nature. For example, sodium or argon or helium or mercury. These are all monatomic elements, meaning that they're composed of single atoms. If you had a chunk of sodium and you were to zoom in on it very, very closely with a very high-powered microscope, you would be able to actually see individual sodium atoms. Same thing goes for argon gas. That's a gas that is composed of single argon atoms. Same goes with helium and mercury. We contrast that with certain elements which are diatomic in nature. And for a diatomic element, what we have is an element that is composed of two atoms. We contrast that with what are called diatomic elements. And in a diatomic element, what we have are pairs of atoms that are bound together to make molecules. Here's a list of diatomic elements that's really important for you to know. Nitrogen is a diatomic element. This is an element that is composed of nitrogen atoms, two nitrogen atoms that are bound together to form a molecule. Hydrogen is also diatomic, as is fluorine, oxygen, iodine, chlorine, and bromine. These are all diatomic elements, meaning that you do not have single atoms of, let's say, chlorine in a sample of chlorine gas, but rather what you have are chlorine molecules, two chlorine atoms that are bound together to make a molecule, not as single Cl atoms flying around. Now, there are some mnemonics that you can use to remember this list of diatomic elements. So one of the mnemonics that one of my students told me a few years ago was never have fear of ice cold beer. And I have these listed out in this way to kind of, I have the elements listed out here in a way that kind of goes with the mnemonic, right? So never have fear of ice cold beer, right? So nitrogen, hydrogen, fluorine, never have fear. And then of ice cold beer, oxygen, iodine, chlorine is cold, and then Br is bromine, that's beer. Another way that you can remember it is by using the periodic table. There's so much information that's encoded within the periodic table. But one way that we can use the periodic table to help us remember the diatomic elements is to keep in mind that there are 7 diatomic elements. And if you go to the periodic table and you find element number 7, that's nitrogen, right? That's one of our diatomics. So find number 7 and then make the number 7 off of it, just like this. And when you do that, you end up hitting a bunch of our diatomics, right? Nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, chlorine, bromine, iodine. We're not going to concern ourselves that much with astatine because this is a unstable and radioactive element that does not exist to an appreciable extent. Not enough of it is present on Earth for us to really be that concerned with it. So let's not worry about astatine. So that gives you 6 of the 7, and then you just have to also remember that hydrogen is a diatomic element. And that's one way that you can keep in mind the list of diatomics that we have. All right, so that gives us a little bit of an introduction to elements and compounds. And next what we're going to do is talk a little bit about atomic structure in our next video.